Last week, the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission, ICPC, said it was launching a probe into how 49.4 billion naira was spent by 52 federal teaching hospitals and medical centers for the management and treatment of COVID-19 cases in the country. This came after a visit by the Minister of State for Finance, Budget and National Planning, Clem Agba, to the University of Port Harcourt Teaching Hospital in Rivers State, where he expressed disappointment over the shabby state of the isolation and treatment center at the hospital. Now joining us to discuss the probe triggered by his visit to UPTH and other hospitals is the Minister of State for Finance, Budget and National Planning, Clem Agba. We shall also be talking to him about the country's debt sustainability program in the face of Nigeria's rising debt stock and dwindling revenue, as well as the implementation of the 2021 budget. Good morning, Mr. Agba. Welcome to the morning show.
Yeah, good morning, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Well, the 52 institutions that are being investigated now over the spending of the 49.4 billion COVID-19 intervention fund by the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission were given about 950 million naira each. We have heard that one of the institutions is the University of Port Harcourt Teaching Hospital. Are you privy to other institutions that are being investigated? When exactly was the money released? Who released it? Who was it released to? And whose responsibility was it to ensure it was spent judiciously? Mr. Agba?
I can't hear anymore. Yeah, I had you up to a stage, but I could see that you were still talking. I don't know what the other questions are. Actually, what happened, I have been going around the country for a couple of months now, and I started that last year when the Economic Sustainability Plan execution started. Like you know, with COVID-19, we had a reduction of our revenues to the tune of about 57%. And we had to reconfigure our budget to put priority on some sensitive areas. One of those was the health sector, where the team that went around the country came back and said the infrastructure in the tertiary hospitals, especially those owned by the federal government, were dilapidated, and there was a need to put in some funding to deal with these issues. One other thing that came out from the team that went around is the fact that we didn't really have molecular labs in the country. And one area where this was very evident was in the area of Lassa fever, for instance. There was only one center. That is the IRA Specialist Hospital. So if you lived in Sokoto or in Maiduguri, Lagos, or Port Harcourt, and there is a suspicion of Lassa fever, the sample has to be taken to IRA for a test for confirmation. So we thought that it was important that the 52 federal tertiary hospitals should have molecular labs. And at this time, where COVID was really very prominent, and there was lack of understanding of the nature of it, there was the need to set up isolation centers and also the intensive care units. So the area of intervention we had in the health sector, especially with these tertiary hospitals, were in 4 different areas. That's setting up of molecular labs, setting up of 10-bedded intensive care units, isolation centers, and then the provision of personal protective equipment. So each of these 52 institutions were given about 950 million. What we did was we did a release of 50% of the amount initially, and these monies went directly to each of these institutions. Because we felt that they needed to be accountable. We also felt that since the various institutions have different situations, there were some who had buildings that they just needed to renovate. Some didn't have buildings to house some of these facilities, so they needed to build. And some didn't even have equipment at all. So each institution had to come up with their own needs and requirements. So it was important that they took responsibilities for what they were doing. So we released those monies directly to them from the Ministry of Finance, Budget, and National Planning. So I had been going around with my team because what you don't inspect, you don't expect. Like I always say to people, you inspect what you expect, otherwise you will find what you don't expect. I had gone around the two hospitals in Abuja, that's the National Hospital and the Federal Medical Center. I had also gone to Kefi to see the Federal Medical Center there. I've been to Kano, I've been to Lagos. I've seen the 3 centers in Edo State. I've also gone to Port Harcourt. In all that I had gone to, I was very impressed with the level of work that had been done, that world-class facilities were being set up. My first disappointment was in the University of Port Harcourt Teaching Hospital, especially considering what I had seen from the rest of the other hospitals. And when I got to Port Harcourt, in fact, I had actually gone for a town hall meeting to engage with beneficiaries of the sustainability plan, because there are different areas, not just in the health sector that we had intervention, but we also had intervention for MSMEs. There were some forms of intervention for youth. There were some in communication area where people were taking through VSAT installation trainings. So I needed to engage with them, and even those who were employed under the NDE, just with a view of getting information of what we have done right, so that in the future, if there are other plans, we can reinforce those things that we had done well. The other thing was to find out and get information on what we haven't done well, with a view to ensuring that there is improvement. And the representative of the CMD of UPTH was the one who spoke glowingly to how they have upgraded the facilities at the teaching hospital, and how this is the first intervention the health sector is getting in the last 10 years. And was also asking for more. And he really spoke very well, and I thought that after the town hall meeting, I should go and see. Usually I go to see different programs, either on the health side, rural roads, or rehabilitation work that is being done by FEMA. But I chose this time to go to UPTH. When I got there, they took me first to the intensive care unit. And I was impressed with what was done there. But I asked a question because I recall that one of the things they had requested to buy was a dialysis machine also for the ICU. And in all of the other hospitals I had visited, I found that they had the dialysis machine in the intensive care units. My question to those other hospitals were, you have a renal department or section. Why do you still have need a dialysis machine in the ICU? And the response is, if one is under intensive care and they require dialysis, I will be killing them by moving them from the ICU to the dialysis section. So I asked the UPTH that same question. Why don't you have a dialysis machine here? Because the records show that this is one of the things that you wanted to buy. They told me they bought, but because they have a renal unit, they kept it there. But that since I seem to be insisting, they will bring it back. So I said, take me to the isolation center. While we were walking there, I was told that they had put up a new building. I don't recall in the plan that they submitted that they were going to put up a building. So I was surprised, and then I got there, said, oh, this is the building that they put up, and they showed me the the sign showing that it's an isolation and treatment center. So I asked to go in, and I was told I couldn't because it was a red zone. I recall that in each of the other hospitals that I had visited, in the heat of COVID, when there were patients, I went into the isolation centers. All I needed to do was to get properly dressed with the PPEs. So I asked if they had PPEs, and they told me yes, they had. I said, okay, then let me have the PPEs. Since doctors and nurses go in with PPEs and they are safe, I would like to do so because it would be a waste of time to fly all the way from Abuja to Port Harcourt only to see a signpost that I can use a teleconferencing to see. And then they told me, oh, they can't find the keys for me to go in. That's when the red flag came up. I was supposed to have left for Benin that day for some other function. So I told them I was willing to stay back until the keys were found. But in the meantime, I needed them to take me to the molecular lab. I got to the molecular lab. I wasn't as satisfied with the molecular lab the way I was with the ICU. Because I recall that from their plan, the intention was to have an expansion in the old molecular lab that they had. I did see an expansion, but when I compare it with what I saw in Kano and what the estimates were, for me, it wasn't commensurate. But I went in and there were equipments that were there. I didn't have the list with me to cross-check, but a sizable number of equipments were there. So, like I said, I was impressed, but not as impressed like I was with the ICU.
Okay, sir.
So I went back to the isolation center.
Okay, sir. Minister, if you could hear me, so we can just, interrogate in other ways. We get the full gist of the matter. Mr. Feni, if you can come in here.
Yes, Honorable Minister. Well, first I have to commend your policy of inspect what you expect. Because if you were sitting in Abuja, you will not unearth some of the things that you are not talking about. But the amount given, 950 million flat for all institutions, does it mean that all the institutions have similar needs and that require the same amount? Because I was also wondering, how, you were saying that, yes, based on their needs assessment, and they were all given 950 million flat, teaching hospitals and federal medical centers. Do they have the same needs? And the other question is, now what is being done to get to the roots of the matter, whether any process of investigation has been commissioned or commenced to get proper assessment of how these funds were used. Then lastly, you mentioned, we know of Uniport, but you mentioned that some other institutions you visited had excellent reports, judicious application of the money. I thought you should have mentioned them. Since we are naming, we should also we are shaming, we should also name those who have done well.
Okay.
Yeah, you not hear me?
Still talking, I can't hear him. Yeah. Anyway, I think you answered the first question yourself by saying that the needs of the institutions were different. You understand? And that is why, like I said, in some institutions, they needed to do some form of renovation. In some institutions, they needed to put in brand new buildings. Like the Bayero University Teaching Hospital in Kano put up a brand new building for the molecular lab. In Kefi, where I went, they were doing some renovation. So the needs differ. Was 950 million sufficient to take care of all their needs? Definitely not. It wasn't sufficient. So for any of the hospitals, they all needed more. But we wanted intervention in these specific areas, considering the situation that we had. So Bayero University was good. The Federal Medical Center in Abuja was very good. The National Hospital, what I saw was world class. Kefi was okay. Lut, I was there, it was fine. The University of Benin Teaching Hospital, good. The psychiatric hospital in Benin was okay. The Ira Specialist Hospital. And like I said, the very first one that I wasn't so impressed with was the UPTH. And it's not in all areas. It's the isolation center in particular. I did say that the ICU was fine. I only asked for the dialysis machine. I mentioned about the molecular lab, where I said they did some expansion, but I thought it could have been better. And then I was going into the isolation center by the time you called in to interrupt my flow, because I had not spoken about what I saw in the isolation center, which is the crux of the matter. Of course, what I said went viral because I was livid. I expected more. At this stage, I'm not saying that they did anything wrong. All I am saying is that I didn't see what I expected to see. And of course, ICPC took it on, and they made contact with me because what I said was public. And I have since supplied them information on what was provided and for what it was provided. So it is for them to go there themselves and check and confirm if anything was amiss. But what I spoke to was what I saw. I know that I had seen some other videos where the CMD has had to do a press conference. He said he wasn't around when I came. There was communication gap. They had the equipment somewhere, and his people didn't show me. So you can see why I can't say they stole or didn't steal, they misappropriated or didn't misappropriate. But what I said was based on what I saw there. Sometime in the near future, I may have to visit again based on what they have said, just to see if there is any difference.
Honorable Minister, if you can hear me, thank you so much
Yeah.
for that insight. And the ICPC and necessary authorities will take that up. But let's talk about matters happening now. Budgets. Let's talk about debt.
Yeah.
Debt stock has risen to 38 trillion from about 10 trillion that it used to be in 2015. The question is, how do we pay back the debt? Debt service ratio goes into 91% thereabout. We've got another deficit of 6 trillion in this 16 trillion budget. The argument the government keeps making is, oh, we've not hit the debt ceiling yet. But sometimes a lot of people wonder, are we not looking at the debt to service ratio, which is taking a big chunk of our monies away? What are you doing about this?
First, this is not an area of my brief. When you say what am I doing about it, I am not the one directly responsible to deal with that. But I can also let you know that there are choices to be made. Because why are we having those debts? It is because when we were rich, things that needed to be done were not done. Like the president would say, take a stock of our production over the years, the crude oil production, and look at the price of crude. Take an average price of crude and look at what the country earned. Why do we have so much infrastructure deficit? And if those are not taken care of today, then we have a bigger problem for the future. What we should look at is that these debts that you speak about, what are the conditions for them? Are they concessionary loans or are they commercial loans? In the first place, these are concessionary loans. The interest rate ranges from about 1.8 to about 2.5%, as against you go to commercial banks and get loans at about 15 to 20-something%. So if you have a moratorium of 10 years to begin to pay this, and you take into consideration the time value of money, it's a gift that we are getting from these institutions. But I think that what is important is, what is this money being used for? The the Ajakuta-Alaja rail line started about 35 years ago. No train ever passed it. Trees started growing on it. This government resuscitated it, revamped it, changed it from being only a cargo rail, and is beginning to run after 35 years, and is carrying passengers. The Kaduna-Abuja rail line is beginning to earn income. I believe, I think that that was about $550 million loan, and I know that about $150 million is already recouped for payment. So that's the way to go. The Lagos-Ibadan train was started, and it's already running. It's beginning to make money. So we'll put in more trains and make more money to pay back. This is how these debts are going to be paid back. The debts are not used for consumption. They are put into specific projects. And I think that that's the way we need to see it. Because if we don't do it now, we are going to spend even more in the future to try to take care of this infrastructure deficit, which requires over $1 trillion to fix. Our roads keep breaking down because we abandoned rail. The major means of transportation for heavy lift, for heavy equipment, is the rail lines. So as long as you do not develop your rails, your roads will continue to fail, no matter what you put into it. So the rail revolution has started. We're already working on getting additional financing for the Calabar to Lagos rail, which is, again, one that is very commercially viable, because you are talking about how we're going to pay these debts. The monies collected from that will be used in paying back the debts. But again, monies that should have been used in rehabilitating roads that keep failing would be reduced. Instead, we'll be using those money to build more roads, because the roads will now be connected to the various rail stations. So if you were to move heavy lift from Lagos to Maiduguri, you take it by rail. It's only when it gets there you put it on the truck and move by road.
Honorable Minister, you've said a lot, but real quickly, let's talk about allocation. FAC, you're the Minister of National Planning, and you plan budget and national planning, and you pretty much plan this economy. Let's talk about revenue coming in. NNPC has been complaining that a lot of money going to subsidy, dwindling FAC allocation. How can we increase revenue? What are the things you're thinking about? What are those new ideas? You're the Minister of National Planning. I think that's within your brief, sir.
It is within my brief, but let me tell you, my job is to facilitate national planning. It is not for me as an individual to write the plan. And I am glad that the Federal Executive Council just approved the new National Development Plan 2021 to 2025. And because we truly want it to be a national plan, not written by the federal government, not written by a consultant, not written by a political party, we had to ensure that all the 36 states were involved in the development of the plan. And because this economy is driven by the organized private sector, we had to get in the organized private sector to drive the plan development process itself. And that's where we brought in Mr. Tedo Peterside. As a government, what we are doing is facilitating and providing the logistics for that plan. Revenue, is it an issue? Of course it is. Our revenue to GDP currently is 7%. And the current plan that we have put in place targets a 15% revenue to GDP. We have the strategic revenue growth initiative currently going on. And like you can see that non-oil is beginning to produce more because we are building in efficiencies into our collection systems. We are working with customs to change the mindset so that they know that they are not just a revenue collecting organization, but that they are supposed to be facilitating trade. And as they facilitate trade and make the business easy, then you find that more revenues will come in. The plan that we have put in place has looked through the various binding constraints that we have, because the economy is supposed to be driven by the private sector. Currently, when you look at the nation's GDP, 92% of it is the private sector. So if they are to drive the economy and we have so much binding constraints that are dragging them back, it means that we'll have a lot of revenue issues. Because if the MSMEs are able to operate well, if the large companies are able to operate well, freely, then we will get more taxes from CIT. And that is why we had to involve the subnationals, because that's where the rubber hits the road. The local governments were very much involved in all of this. And for the first time in the plan that we have put in place has got 3 volumes. The volume 1 being the plan itself, volume 2 being the prioritized programs and projects that have been costed. So we have a knowledge of the financial requirements to deal with this. And then the volume 3 is the legislative imperatives. We have identified about 18 laws that needs to change in order to be able to catalyze growth through the organized private sector. We had looked at about 10 different policies that also need to be changed. Of course, should we continue the subsidy? No, I wouldn't support that. We lose about 3 trillion alone from petroleum subsidy. There is a subsidy from exchange rate, and you find that there's also subsidy in power. All of these are monies that can be put into more infrastructure, stimulate growth in the economy, create employment. So, yes, I accept I am the minister responsible for planning, but I don't write the plan. I facilitate the process for the plan if it must be national. Otherwise, it becomes a Clem Agba plan. I will also tell you that the 3 political parties that are at the Senate level, we are invited to participate in this plan, and that includes the PDP, the ABGA, and APC, because the president didn't want this to be seen as just his plan or a plan of APC. You know? So that's the way we are going, and that's the way it ought to be, to carry along all those who need to be involved. In fact, this plan had a lot of youth involved in its conceptualization, because the future belongs to them, and they are the ones who are going to wear the shoes, not those who are already 60 or 70 and above. And that is why you had the youth in both in the entire 26 technical working groups that worked on this plan. The youth were represented at the Central Working Group, and they were also at the National Steering Committee, because it is their plan.
Okay, Honorable Minister, let's look at the execution of the 2021 budget. The capital aspect of the budget. To what extent has the capital budget been funded, especially as it relates to infrastructure? Then secondly, the finance bill is with the National Assembly right now. What do we expect? More taxes to raise revenue?
I have to leave, let him know.
Honorable Minister, I hope you got the question.
Take it again. You said what?
Okay, I will take it again.
I lost you.
Now, the 2021 budget so far, the capital aspect of the budget, to what extent have you been able to fund infrastructure, the amount budgeted for infrastructure? What percentage of funding has gone in? We're in December right now. And the second question, the finance bill now with the National Assembly. What are we expecting? More taxes to raise more revenue? What are we expecting?
Okay, first, in terms of releases, as at August, we had released about 70% of the capital budget. And only 2 weeks ago, the cash management committee met, and we are releasing the balance. So we are funding the 2021 budget 100%, just like we funded the 2020 budget 100%. The whole idea of the finance bills as to create more efficiencies and effectiveness in the system. It is to broaden the tax net, not so much to begin to increase taxes. And the whole aim is to improve on our revenues. I would need to go. I am in a panel with the Open Government Partnership currently taking place in South Korea. We're celebrating our 10 years, and I need to set up.
Okay, thank you so much, Honorable Minister.